Right. So now you know why you need to specialize and why you need to nail your niche and why we're doing this exercise. What we want to talk about now is how. How do we actually distill down and get that hypothesis of this is the market that I'm going to commit to. This is the problem that I'm going to commit to. How do we create a high value niche? I want to walk you through it. Now, I've got an exercise here. I basically break this down into three main categories and then a summary. The first is the who. This is the market, right? If you remember the Venn diagram, you've got the high value market, you've got the high value problem. This first section is going to help you brainstorm on who. The second section is going to obviously help you brainstorm on what that problem is. And then I have this third section in here, which is, this is the pain of the problem. This is why this problem is a problem. This is why this problem is a problem for this market. Okay. All of these play a critical role in your marketing and your sales efforts later. All right. So let's start here with the who. Now I have in here a ChatGPT prompt. The reason I have this is you can copy and paste and change a couple of things, or you can just look at this and say, how could I write a better prompt that helps me think like my market? Essentially, what I want you to do is use GPT as a thought partner. I love to use GPT as the other smart person in the room that can be my market if I want them to. They can be my critic if I want them to. They can be my devil's advocate if I want them to. That's how I love to use GPT. So what I would encourage you to do is think through what's a prompt that I could write that, based on what I know of my market today and the problem that I'm going to solve today, what are the firmographic, demographic, and psychographic considerations that I should be taking into account based on that service? All right. Now, one thing is here, especially in the demographics, a lot of people get into persona building. They get into building these personas where they say, hey, this is Harry. Harry lives in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. He's 44 years old. He has a high school education. He dropped out of college. He enjoys reading books and riding bikes, and they've got this entire persona built. There is value in doing that at certain stages of business or with certain types of businesses. For example, if I'm running Doritos commercials to 4 different markets and I need to create the commercial in a way that's relevant to each person, I'm going to go, okay, cool. Create a persona. Let's make that commercial for that person. Based on where you are today and based on what you're selling, I highly doubt that's going to add a lot of value for you. So I even say when we get started on this, don't overthink this part of the exercise. Don't try to build out a complete persona. What I want you to do is I want you to think through what are the actual facts that are relevant for selling your particular service. Remember, we're going to use demographics and firmographics to find our audience. Now, what are the facts? What are the considerations, the characteristics of the buyer or the end user of my service that are actually relevant for me? So I get you started with some considerations here. Maybe it's age, maybe it's gender, maybe it's ethnicity, race, cultural background. Maybe education does play a role. Maybe income does play a role, or marital status, lifestyle interests, hobbies, consumer behaviors, buying habits, things like that. Now, I have this section down here. If you want to duplicate this and add other things, by all means, go ahead and add those. What I don't want you to do is just treat this like a form. I don't want you to just say, okay, Ray asked for age, he asked for gender, he asked for ethnicity, race, cultural background. That's not why I have this here. I have this here to get you going, to get you thinking. Again, coming back to the GPT prompt, you could also use GPT to start really thinking through this. But this is for you to take a step back and think, based on my market, what are the relevant things that I need to think about from a demographic standpoint? All right. And there may be very few, depending on what you're selling, you may say, there's really not that many. And there may be a lot. Again, depends on what the problem that you're solving, depends on your market, depends on your offer, depends on where you're going with your business. All right. I do the same thing with firmographics. Again, don't overthink this part of the exercise. If you're selling a B2B service, there'll probably be more considerations here. Industry, size of company, basically. Sometimes you're working with brand new companies that are just getting started and just getting, fresh operations, and you help systematize things. Or maybe you work with companies that have been in business for 40 years and you modernize systems. If it's relevant, plug things like this in. Geography, legal status, ownership type, their customer base. And again, here, you've got something that you can just click that and duplicate it. These are things that I think of when I think of the firmographics. And you can even pull up Sales Navigator. There's a lot of considerations on here. This is a great way to try to filter things. They've got, as you can see, geography, industry, Some of these are geared at the individual. Some of these are geared at the business, but this is also another way to think about the criteria that you're going to use to target your market. Then last, I have, brainstorming on the psychographics. And I said, this part of the exercise is going to be more relevant as it pertains to marketing and sales. In other words, this is going to be more relevant when it comes to what content you're writing, how you're positioning your product, how you're positioning your service. And you just want to think through, what are those attitudes, beliefs, interests, values, personality characteristics, basically, that are relevant to purchasing your service or getting the desired outcome. Again, in the other lesson I shared, hey, I'm looking for high drive, low ego people. Why? Because that means they're going to put in the work. That means they're going to ask for help and implement it. That is a good combination for me to actually get the desired income, to get the transformation that I'm looking to deliver for clients. So think through those considerations. What are they for you? And psychographics is one where GPT could be really useful for you. Okay. So that's brainstorming on the who, on the market side of it. Then what I want you to do is brainstorm on the problem side of this. And I have in here a prompt. I said, I'm a coach, consultant, agency, whatever you are, that helps B2B SaaS businesses solve sales challenges, whatever that is. We're going to want to get more specific, obviously. What are some of the associated problems with this? What are some of the associated symptoms with this? And some questions to get you thinking, right? So what are the primary problems that they have that you can solve? Okay. List those, usually 3 to 5, something like that. And then, just like we talked about in the lesson, how did they describe those problems? Like if they sat down and said, I want to solve such and such, or if they went to GPT and said, I'm really struggling with such and such, or they go have a beer with one of their friends, and they say, I am just tired of dealing with something. What is it that they're saying? Because most often we have what they call the curse of knowledge, and it's difficult for us to remember what it's like to not know something. And once we have that, the toothpaste is out of the tube. It becomes really difficult to think back and use the exact language that we had in the full beginner's mind, right? So really think through, what are the words that they're using to describe this problem? And if you're struggling with this, again, GPT is a great tool for this. What are the symptoms associated with the problems? I often talk about chocolate broccoli, which is a concept that was introduced to me by Dan Martell. Chocolate broccoli is essentially the root cause of what you have. That's the broccoli. That's the solution that they need. But a lot of times it's not what they say they want, right? Like they say they want a CRM, but they need a sales process. Okay. If you go out talking about sales process, you may miss the boat. That's not what they're thinking. That's not the symptom that they associate that with. Okay. So what are the symptoms that they associate with these problems? And then what are the root causes? Those are the things that typically right? So I'm asking you to really think through the problem and start to think about the marketing aspect of it and the marketing angle. Then what are the biggest mistakes that they're making trying to solve this problem on their own without your help? Okay. So you've got 3 to 5 problems. You're thinking through how they describe them. You're really starting to think through, what are the symptoms, right? What are the things that they're looking for? And because we've got to package it in a way that we get them what they want, but deliver what they need. We have to get them the results. So that's what they need, but we've got to sell the service. So we've got to talk about what they want, right? Chocolate broccoli. Then what are the root causes? Biggest mistakes that they're making. This oftentimes, once you start brainstorming on this, becomes great content too, because you can highlight some of the mistakes and they go, damn, that's me. I'm doing that right. And how would you describe the big hairy ass problem that they have collectively? This is important. We're actually going to use this later. So after you think about the problems that they have that you can solve, I want you to think through, can you distill this down to one problem? Are all of those encapsulated or included into one big hairy ass problem? Again, we're going to come back to that later. Okay. Then brainstorm on the why. Now, this is where you get into positioning. This is where you start to really focus on, how are we going to angle our solution? Now, I wrote here a prompt. I said, I'm a coach, consultant agency, whatever, that helps specific markets solve this problem, right? I'd like to better understand their perspective and how they see and feel this problem. Please provide 10, 20 ways that this affects them as a person or a firm so I can use this to better relate, market to, or engage with them. Now, I actually have a short video here. This is about 2 minutes. And because I put in something like this and it gave me an answer that was mediocre. And so I did a follow-up prompt and it gave me a much better answer. The second answer in here is much more of what I'm looking for on something like this. It's going to be much more beneficial for you. So take a look at that. Again, 2 minutes. And we want to think through these things. All right, that problem, why is that a problem? Right? Like why is that a problem? They aren't able to get sales. What's that mean? What does solving that mean for their business? What does solving that mean for them as a person? Even if you're selling a B2B offer, if I'm a founder and you help me build a client acquisition system that I can use to get clients at will, and it unlocks a lifestyle that allows me to live remotely and retire my wife from the, you start to think through, okay, that's how the buyer or the end user or the person using your service thinks. You're still dealing with people. So what is solving that problem unlock for them as a person? What do they want more than anything else? Like if you gave them a magic wand, what is it that they want more than anything else? Now, what's the cost of not solving that? And if they don't solve it, is it a stagnant issue or does this thing keep getting worse? Okay. What does not solving them cost them as a person? Any reputational impact to not solving this? I remember as CEO of a company working with turnarounds and thinking, damn, if I don't turn this around, does this affect my opportunity to get another one? Or what does this mean to investors or the board or my peers or things? That is what people are thinking about when they are buying or not buying services. Okay. And then what do they think of themselves if they don't solve this? Like you're really getting into their head and you may not think like, damn, that is this really relevant? I'm telling you, the more that you understand this, the more that you think like this in your marketing, the more powerful everything that you do is going to be, the more that you can get into their brain. Okay. What is the biggest mistake that they're making right now without your help? And what I don't mean here is, well, not hiring me. No, not really. Like, what are the mistakes that they're doing that contribute to this, or those limiting beliefs that lead them to not getting help? Like, it's not just not hiring you. Like, what are the mistakes that they're making right now? Why is that a mistake? And then some room here to duplicate. All right. So I'll close this up. Now what we want to do, you've taken time, you've brainstormed, you've gone through these questions. Now let's summarize this. Let's recap. Let's get really clear so that we can come back to this form when we're doing marketing stuff later, when we're hiring agencies later, when we're hiring freelancers later, when we're creating a website, whatever it is. I want to be able to come back to this and have some really clear language. All right. Who is your target market? Can you describe this market as clearly as possible? And what is the problem that you solve? These are the two things that we need for a high value niche. Who's your market? What's the problem you solve? Now you'll remember these questions from the lesson. What is the economic value of the solution? What is the emotional value of the solution? 1 to 10, how painful is this problem? 1 to 10, how urgent is this problem? 1 to 10, how difficult is this problem to solve? What I want you to do is think through these questions that help determine, is this a good problem to solve? Is this a really high value niche? And if not, where are the weak spots or where are going to be the problem spots that I'm expecting challenges? Like knowing that they're there, but I know that it may be difficult. Okay. So 1 to 10, these three, how will you find them? And then high level, what would you do if you were them to solve this problem on your own right now? What are the 3 to 5 steps you would take? And I don't mean hiring you. Like that's the obvious answer. But if you were them and you weren't an option, what would you do if you were them to solve this problem right now? Okay. This is going to be something we come back to. Then who's a bad fit? You've gone through this process. You've started to think through who you want to work with. Can you give me some characteristics or some considerations or some facts or anything that you know is going to be a bad fit? Right. So plug these in. And now we've started to create a high value niche that we can use to start marketing to, which is actually going to be our next lesson. We're going to dive into messaging frameworks. Cool. I look forward to seeing what you come up with, and let's make this a high impact, high value niche that we can leverage the shit out of to build a business. Adios.